What's up, guys? This is Jason Senti for BlueFirePoker.com. Today I'm going to be doing a 50-cent dollar 6-max no limit hold'em cash game video. My last few videos have been PLO, and there have been requests for a part 4 to my most recent PLO series, several of them, so I will probably go back and do that if you guys are the same people watching PLO, although I'm sure a lot of the audience does not cross over. Any case, I wanted to get some no limit content out there here, so I would go back and do that part 4 coming up if I decide to go ahead and do that. Right out of the gate, I'll admit that I'm a little bit rusty when it comes to playing online no limit hold'em cash games. I've played quite a bit more, or quite a few more tournaments in the last 8 to 10 months, mostly live, as I'm sure most of you guys would know. And obviously with some success, and that's all well and good, but it's been a while since I've grinded online no limit cash. This is especially considering that I've made most of my living playing PLO for the last few years. Although last year and the year before, it's slowly transitioned to where I'm playing more and more PLO. So there's always been some no limit hold'em cash games in there, but as of now, it's been a number of months since I have played online no limit hold'em cash. Of course, I definitely still think I'm a favorite at small stakes no limit videos. But it would be a while before I would start making 5-10 or higher, unless it were a specific situation, something heads up. Just because until I, log some more hands again and make sure I've got a little bit of the rust off, I would prefer to be teaching here at lower stakes. There's still a lot of value, I think, talking about the thought process, etc. And if I do get into any situations where I really, maybe I think I need to have a little bit more information about the current climate of the games, etc., in order to be able to make the decision, I have great people at my disposal, and I'll actually talk to them, then give that information to you. I know that there are some pretty interesting spots in this session that I played like a week and a half ago. A number of, at least situations that I've encountered quite a while, probably relatively difficult and just unique. So I will probably talk to some of the other Blue Fire pros, at least for one hand, that I believe will probably come around the end of this video. It's possible there'll be some other hands in the future too, depending on how long this series goes. Right out of the gate, you see I have more of the screen showing this time. People have requested that I don't have the Hold'em Manager hand replayer thing up, covering the tables. So doing my best to listen, and I just recorded a little bit extra of the screen this time so that I could put those over on the left. Well, that said, let's get it rolling. To be honest, I'm pretty sure in this session I lost at least a few buy-ins, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was mostly cooler stuff. Definitely one or two hands that were pretty tough, and I know of at least one river decision that could have gone either way, but we'll see it. Either way, we're definitely going to have some fun spots. I started recording after already playing a few hands. I was like getting the recorder set up. So the top right hand, the way that went down, I guess I'll probably end up making a quick note of it. But I'm pretty sure what ended up happening was this guy either just flatted. Yeah, I think he just flatted with ace queen and a pretty short stack, and I had ace king. Flop came ace 9-9. He's a weaker player. Shorter, or I'm assuming he is anyway, shorter stacked and just flatted. So I decided just to check back the flop. I'm usually way, way ahead of him, unless he happens to have a 9. Most aces that don't 3-bet, I expected him to 3-bet ace-queen, don't even really have outs against me, unless it's runner-runner, more outs to a chop with an ace. So I decided to check back, maybe give him a chance to stab, but he never did. Then I bet a few streets, and he just called me down with ace-queen. So certainly looks like a weaker player. And you can see I marked him with a green note, because that's what I do with players I consider weaker. If at some point you see me marking you with green, I apologize. If you're a Blue Fire member, I'm just going to assume I made a bad read. This is a little bit of an exploitive play. I decided to go ahead and do up here in the top right. Certainly not necessary, but I assume it's profitable. 0-0 MX still have, I really have almost zero information about pretty much all of these players. Unless I've happened to play with them in the past for a video or something. I just won't have any stats on them. So this guy, while I only have 11 hands, he looks tight. doesn't mean much because the sample's too small. But I do see that he is playing at least three tables through the four that I'm playing at. And I believe that this beastie guy is pretty weak. So when he limps the button and 00 or OOMX kind of ISOs, I think that from the small blind his range is going to be tighter and stronger than any position where he'd be in position. So if like this guy limped the cutoff and he raised the button, something like that. Even I think it'll be tighter than if he were in the big blind and this guy had limped the button, simply because in the big blind he is last to act, etc. He doesn't have to worry about other things. But all that said, I still think people are going to be doing this relatively wide if they're reasonable players and regulars. So I just decided to go ahead and 3-bet here. Get him to fold a fair amount of hands that I think people play against weak players like this, but will just fold to a 3-bet. Hands like Queen 10 suited. People do this even with like pocket sixes, pocket fives. Now it's possible he could just end up going with some of those hands or calling and we'll have to play a pot. But I think a lot of times in this kind of spot, people will just end up giving up with a fair amount of their hands. Especially he very well could be doing this with just as weak as like 5-7 suited or something. Of course, he'll also be doing this with his big hands. But I think it's going to be a profitable 3-bet, but certainly not mandatory. Just probably slightly plus EV, and certainly is going to increase your variance a little bit, but also make you tougher to play against. Really almost in as many situations as you possibly can in poker, you should be able to have air in your range, or at least weak hands. There's certainly going to be some spots where you just don't, and almost nobody is balanced. I'm not saying that's why I did this, but it's a nice little side effect. At least I can see times where I'm going to have air in spots like this. And I get 4-bet, and with King 4 off, I'm just going to fold. It's a really small 4-bet, and it's the type of 4-bet that I will flat in position with various hands. I think King 4 off is a bad one to be doing that with. Also, it really plays pretty poorly when I get called, and if I were to shove and get called. Because, of course, I'll be up against ace king reasonably often, big pairs, even if he's doing it, doing this kind of thing, 4-bet, getting it in with sevens, or nines or something, which I, somewhat doubt. We don't really have any history, although it's possible he knows who I am. King 4 off is just playing so poorly, so I think it's a pretty clear fold at this point. This accelerate guy looks like he could be a reg. It's kind of tough to tell early on. I guess I'm not seeing him at a bunch of tables, but he is 3-betting a fair amount. His stats look pretty crazy, but it's only over 17 hands. So just the fact that we've seen him 3-bet a bit and is opening a fair amount of hands makes it likely he's a reg. And at least what I'm guessing is one situation where he's been 3-bet, he didn't fold. So button versus big blind with a hand like King Queen off, there are a number of players that I actually will just be flatting this with. It plays okay as a flat. You're going to flop overs pretty often, top pair good kicker, yada yada yada, straight draws. And I think it plays pretty well. All that said, if you have somebody who's pretty loose on the button, or loose in any position, but doesn't fold to a lot of 3-bets, they are going to be calling with a lot of dominated hands. Queen Jack type hands, King Jack, King 10, Queen 10, etc., etc. And against guys like that, unless they are 4-betting a ton, in which case they probably aren't flatting a lot, you really should be 3-betting hands like this in this kind of situation just to be able to have them put more money in when they're dominated. So it's a pretty standard, clear thing, but it may not be to some people, and I tend to talk about every detail in poker. So, any case, we got a fold, no big deal. Bottom right, we ISO raised a limper, this Simon guy. Open limped. I had seen him open limp before, I believe, which is why I already have noted as green and probably just put in. Saw him open limp, and then maybe how he reacted to it. ISO was 6-3 suited. Obviously, it's really weak, but this guy appears to be really weak. I think I'm just going to take it down, post flop a bunch. And he does have just enough behind that there's going to be room to double barrel in spots and do things like that. If he had like a really short stack or even like 25, then I think doing this is substantially worse simply because you don't have all that much room to mess around against him post flop. and really take advantage of your skill differential. In any case, I'm just going to make standard c-bet on this board. I turn a gut shot. It's not a spot where I think we should be barreling, even though we did pick up a little bit of equity. Would have been, if this were like the five of hearts, I probably am just going to do it, simply because now we have quite a bit of equity against almost anything. But overall, I think players like this who are limp calling are going to be pretty passive in general. Obviously that's a really passive pre-flop strategy, and that usually carries over to post-flop. So that means he's going to have top pair type hands in his range. And even when he has like second pair type hands and 8-9, for draws or Jack Queen, they just aren't going to be folding him on the turn. So unless you plan to go for three barrels and hope that he folds everything except top pair, and still sometimes you're just going to lose your stack or your half stack, I guess, to top pair. It's a spot where I think you should really just kind of give up. It's still going to be very profitable to ISO him and c-bet flops, because every time he misses, he's just going to fold. And he's going to miss most of the time. This doesn't appear to be one of those times, and I'm just going to check it down. The queen doesn't change much. Now he, of course, might fold a 10 or something, when maybe he wouldn't have before, but he's still not going to be folding a king for sure. And Jack Queen now has a pair, so that's no good. He actually had Ace King, which is pretty crazy. That with, I don't know what he had pre-flop, 60 big blinds or something, he's limp calling Ace King. Pretty good sign for us. Looks like the games are alive and well. The bottom left, you'll see that there'll be some chat going on quite a bit. One of these players accelerate. Even more reason to believe he's a reg, a decent player. Recognized who it was, and offered hand histories and stuff, etc. It's pretty common stuff, but then most of the table started talking about it. So you'll see me just making notes of like knows who I am, etc. It's the kind of thing that I know it's like somewhat unfortunate for you guys to be watching videos where I know that players know who I am, because it puts me in a situation that I'll be teaching in a spot that you guys, or most of you, likely won't be in. But really, it's kind of unavoidable, and I don't just want to turn off observer chat or turn off chat so that I don't find out. I mean, getting some information is good, and not to mention, I also don't want to look like a jerk at the table more than anything. It's nice when people talk, and this guy's offering hand histories and stuff. That's really cool. Hopefully he checks out this video. Any case, I, for a little bit right after that happened, I actually thought about, and I've had this happen in a few videos, oh man, maybe I shouldn't, even post this one, etc. But honestly, after playing and losing, I decided I really wanted to at least start posting it, just because I thought there's a fair amount of interesting spots. And if nothing else, some people might think I didn't post it because I lost, although it's not really the way it works. Just post whatever I have, assuming there's interesting content. So sorry about that, but some of it's, a bit unavoidable. Top right, I open tens in small blind and bet two streets, standard. Fold to the turn. And I'm taking notes on Simon. You can see I'm including a little bit of timing stuff and extrapolating from what we saw, specifically on the river, that he's not going to be value betting thin. I check back the turn, and he still really quickly checked the river with top pair, top kicker. I think we can safely assume, though, anyway, somebody who limp calls ace king isn't going to be value betting thinly. It's part of the mentality, the whole ace king's a drawing hand, etc. And of course, while that's right, ace king also dominates a ton of hands that will play against you. But that's not the way he's thinking. And as a result, we can assume that he's not going to be value betting much besides, really nutty hands, things that are almost always good, which is nice for us. Means we can see cheap showdowns when we want, etc. Open 10-9 offsuit on the top left. So we have a few situations here. Against certain players, like really, really aggro guys, that might actually be a little bit loose, small blind versus big blind. I don't think it is against the vast majority of players. This guy over a small sample, we see he just hasn't played much. Um, 9-9 over 24 hands. But worth noting, against some players, it might be better to just fold it or possibly even limp call if you have it as part of an overall game plan. I say as part of an overall game plan because if you're only limp calling weak hands that want to see a flop, don't want to get 3-bet, you become pretty exploitable. But I could see merit in developing a limp re-raising game, limp call, possibly some limp folds versus certain sizing with various hands. I could see merit in it, although I have not explored that too much when it comes to uh, cash game play. Although I have messed around with it in tournaments. And we flopped the nut flush draw, 2 overs, top right. We're just going to be betting. I'm pretty happy about it. Being that we're out of position, I think it's really our best option. The occasional check raise against certain players is going to be reasonable, and you may have to work into your game. If you're playing against people regularly who are going to mess with you a lot. So if they're going to raise a lot of flops when you see bet, if they're going to, bet when check to a ton, you have to develop a counter strategy. And basically, you're going to have to check fold to them pretty often because they will mess with you. So as a result, on certain board types, and that's a decent one, you're going to have to, check call or check raise and have those, as part of your game plan when you are checking. So in spots like that, where I'm up against somebody like that with 2 overs and a flush draw, especially if they are more on the aggro side and less on the passive side, a better way of saying it is, maybe there are some players who will mess with you quite a bit, but a lot of the way they do it is they float a bunch, they call check raises, do things like that. Against guys like that, there's a little bit less value because against somebody who's more likely to just raise c bets all the time, possibly 3-bet you if you check raise, that hand plays really well because you can check raise and they can 3-bet you small and you can chip on them, and it's absolutely wonderful. It still can be valuable against guys who are more likely to call you down light, etc. But there's even more value in those types of situations. And getting to know your opponents, especially the regulars in your games, and how they approach things is just absolutely huge and so valuable. I know people have talked about that a lot, but it really is specific things like that, the way they approach the game, what they do when you do check to them on certain boards as a pre-flop raiser, yada yada yada, and you can build through pretty straightforward logic good ranges to exploit those types of things, or at least to protect yourself at minimum. So be paying attention. Bottom left, I 3-bet. 8-7 suited, small blind versus big blind. Calling's fine. 3-betting's fine. Folding's bad. Whenever. I decided to 3-bet this time. I'm not doing it all the time. Probably more often than not. Fortunately, we didn't flop very well. We flopped a gutter, which isn't a very good gutter, but that's generally fine in no limit hold'em. We don't have any sort of backdoor stuff at all. There's already 2 overs. We don't have a backdoor flush draw. There really is no reason to check back here, I don't think. I think you just have to bet and fold if you get raised, and we are going to get raised, a decent percentage of the time on this board. This board is pretty coordinated, but it really is just kind of the best play we have right here, and we got raised. I don't like my sizing. I'm not really sure why I went nearly half pot. I know in 3-bet pots, I definitely bet smaller, as almost everybody does now. People have gotten a lot better with bet sizing over the years, thanks to videos like these ones, I'm sure. But at the same time, this is a really coordinated board, and I just think on coordinated boards like this, I should be betting bigger. It doesn't have to be huge, but I should be a bit over half pot, and this is a lot closer to exactly half pot. So I tend to adjust my bet sizing based on board type, as a lot of people do. Not everybody does. There are people out there who are successful who just more or less do kind of standard bet sizing in all situations. As long as, they just keep it pretty much the same all the time. But I prefer to change it based on board type. You can see I'm plugging Blue Fire Poker in the bottom left. So when he's asking why they should switch from another competitor site to Blue Fire Poker, Deuce is cracked. It's a really, really good site. And honestly, my only real answer, specifically when I'm playing No Limit Hold'em, to why they should switch or consider at least getting both, which I think is probably ideal, is Phil and Dr. Jiggy. Top left, flatted sevens. Flop was bad for us. Um, Gave up. Easy situation. Bottom right, we have another situation here where we've got an open limper who we believe is pretty weak, and then somebody who has at least regular type stats, reg-ish stats, although I don't think he's on any other tables with us, but there are a million 50-cent dollar tables, so that doesn't tell us much. I'm pretty sure, at least at the time I was playing this, there was way more than anybody could ever play. Um, Any case, when he ISO raises, I think this is another reasonable spot to 3-bet. It is even more beneficial that we are in position and have an ace blocker. This is definitely a better spot than the one up top. I think his range is just going to be substantially wider in the cutoff than it would be from the small blind, even though these are two different people. I'll say the average reg. Also, we've seen this guy play a little bit loose and aggressive. So I think this is a pretty clear spot that is good to 3-bet. Sometimes you don't want to go too bananas with it. Excuse me. Unless, of course, you're playing in a game or against a villain who seems to just be consistently giving up versus this type of play. Um, you know, Players who maybe are pretty good multi-tabling regs, but not necessarily great poker players. So people who 24 table or 12 table, whatever it may be, and aren't always paying attention. Sometimes you can find guys who are really exploitable in ways like this. Like they will just continuously ISO the weak player and not adjust when you 3-ball them all the time. And of course, against some players, you might actually even get them to tilt, in which case you will hopefully be playing better than them or get them to try and adjust when they're out of position with deep stacks versus you. And you can generally take advantage of it if you've thought about it and how to anticipate their reaction. All that said, I think a lot of that's stylistic. It is less my style to just absolutely hammer on somebody, until they adjust in a way so that I can exploit it. I'm a little bit more likely to try and slowly exploit people and not necessarily make it obvious. But it depends on what your style is. To be perfectly honest, the way I'm talking about it is a little less fun than the other way, which of course I have messed around with. So top left, I'm in the big blind with 3-6 of clubs, and it just limped me. This Cobb 81 open limped. Flop the open-ended straight flush draw along with the flush. It's all well and good and wonderful. I just decided to go for a check raise. I certainly considered leading, but I think checking is quite a bit better. I think when people open limp and they don't get raised and it gets checked to them, they often treat it as kind of like a c-betting situation, basically as if they actually have the initiative and have a stronger range. So I think we're going to get a c-bet from most of his air on this type of board. And I think just going ahead and check raising as opposed to doing something like check calling and hoping to get barrels is substantially better in this spot. All we know about this guy is really that he limped and is betting, coordinated board. I think there's just far, far more value. We don't have any reason to believe he's going to be double barreling super wide, etc. Also, when he does have a hand like ace-x with a club, any sort of big club, maybe even just something as weak as like 7-8 with one club for a gutter and a club, that there's a very good shot he's just not going to fold. So we may as well just try and put as much money in as we can. So it's a pretty clear check raise, and I'm pretty sure he just folds. So all that doesn't even matter. But top right, I open pocket threes and get 3-bet by the button. Stats so far make him look to be a bit of a regular. I think that folding is clearly the best play until you have more information. It really is a spot that is very, very difficult to play post flop. With a hand like pocket threes, you're pretty much, if you just call, you're pretty much set mining. Um, and, or like, I guess, hoping to hit a super nutty flop for you, like 2, 4, 5, and just get it in with your potential set outs. And, although sometimes you still have the best hand, and straight outs. So, any case, I certainly don't have the history to be four betting and getting that in. Doing that at any point is pretty light, but part of a decent game plan versus some people. And I don't think calling's any good, so I folded. 3-bet pot kings in the bottom left. Hearing from a good chunk of the table that once again that they know who I am, etc. So I'm really hoping to get action with kings and pick it up the exact next hand. Um, Gonna encounter different types of people who react in different ways when they know who you are. I guess I was gonna go into a little bit of a discussion about that, but there really isn't any point. It isn't all that beneficial to most of you guys, and if it comes up to where it's necessary for me to talk about because of a play, then I'll do that. But until then, I may as well ignore it for now. We have three hands going on. Bottom left, I just check back on the a6-6. It's pretty standard with pocket kings. There is some merit to betting against some people, etc. But this is definitely the standard and lower variance route. Same line with lower variance. I even check back the turn. I actually think he's probably checking to me with most of his weak ace hands that he may or may not be playing from the big blind. The small ace-x suited, etc. And I believe he checks to me again on the river, and now I finally decide to value bet. Um, of course, he could now have a jack, but I think a jack almost always bets the river, simply because I look like I'm going for a showdown line with either a weak ace, pocket kings, king, queen, etc. And I think he'd want to get value. So I decided to bet, hoping to get a call from, something like king, queen, if he has it, although I have a couple kings. Maybe some kind of queen X, a queen 10 or something, and then, of course, it's possible he has some other pocket pairs like pocket sevens or eights. So either way, I don't think I'm getting check raised, hardly ever, and I think almost always the best hand. So it's pretty easy at that point. Um, Bottom right, I flatted in the big blind to a small open, a min raise, I believe, with pocket fives. I think this is the big blind. I'm actually going to rewind just a tiny bit just to make sure. Yeah. So I guess we can watch it, but I go ahead and flat flops 8-4-4 two diamonds, or 8-8-4 two diamonds, and I think this is a pretty clear check call. We don't know anything about this player yet, but on this type of board, really check calling is our best option. It's not a thrilling one. You know, we are, basically every turn in the river, or a lot of them are going to be overcards to our pair, but we're just, doing our best to try and show it down, and we don't have any reason to believe this guy's just going to barrel the heck out of us all the time. So, standard. Top right, I opened 8-7 off on the button. Got called by the guy who opened limp before. He donks a flop that really isn't all that good for us. We have flop bottom pair, but a lot of hands have a lot of equity against us, even when they don't have a pair. And of course, hands like Queen X and 9X, Queen Jack, 9-10, 9 Jack suited, etc., are all within the standard range for flatting in the big blind. I don't really know if this guy has pretty standard ranges, being that we have seen him open limp, although he does look like he's relatively tight. In any case, it's not a great situation. Because I don't think he's a very good player, I decided just to go ahead and flat the flop, and we'll make decisions on the turn. Against players who I think are better, it's the kind of spot where I'm actually more likely to raise or fold the flop, just because I pretty much have to fold like a ton of turns. Not all of them, of course. I can hit a 7, I can hit an 8, or it could be like a complete brick, and I consider peeling one more time. But it is the kind of spot where it's going to be really hard to continue past the flop, and so I'm just like counting on the guy giving up on the turn, which I'm not expecting most people to do when they bet here either for value or with a draw. So, any case, against him though, I think it's fine to peel once, and we'll see how he reacts. turn card's atrocious for us. 10 Jack out there, and so did diamonds. He bet, and it's a really, really easy fold now. Turn card is awesome for us in the bottom right. We pick up a boat, and he bets again. So, when he bets a flop, it doesn't really mean much regarding his range. Expecting to do it with any of his two overs type hands, which is going to be, truthfully, probably the majority of his range is going to be two overs. Of course, he's going to have some 8Xs. He's going to have some big pairs, pocket fours sometimes. But, I expect to be ahead of his range and hoping to show down. On the turn, once he bets again, I think his range typically and anyway gets substantially more narrow. This, of course, isn't the case against people who just habitually double barrel in all situations, especially if they're reasonable hand readers and assume I have a hand similar to this and they just want to put the pressure on. But guys like that in general though, and what I'm going to assume about somebody before I know much about him, is that now he likely has hands as weak as a flush draw, I guess some kind of straight draw at this point. There are certainly some 7-9 suited, things like that now have picked up some more equity and just decided to barrel, and it's really not a bad spot to do it. And then, of course, over pairs, 8X, pocket fours. And so now his range has gotten substantially stronger, and we crush almost everything. So I think this is a pretty good spot, especially when he bets closer to pot. I think it makes his range likely even a bit more on the stronger side. I think it's a good spot to check 3X. If we make it, a little over $30, we're going to have great stack sizes to shove the river. I expect that, most people are going to fold flush draws in this turn, but I wouldn't expect a set to fold if we, a straight if we're lucky enough to be in a spot where he has 6-7. Over pairs, it really depends on the player, what they think of me, etc. And so, yeah, I think it's a pretty clear check raise. And of course, an 8 we are still going to get a call from, and we'll likely get a stack, a call or a shove. So we check raise, and he calls pretty quickly, which is encouraging for us. Most of the time, when somebody calls really quickly, and I've talked about this a gajillion times, I'm not going to too much, it makes it more likely that it's a draw. In this spot, I think that's pretty unlikely because I don't think people are continuing that often with draws here. So I think it makes it substantially more likely he has an overpair. And, basically it's one of these hands that he doesn't really feel like there's much of a decision to. If he had an 8 or a boat or something, of course he'd consider shoving. If he had a draw, he'd at minimum consider folding. So in this spot, I think it makes it pretty clear that it's an overpair. Of course, he could just be somebody who acts fast all the time, but I would err on the side of thinking he's going to have a hand like 9s through aces a ton here. So wait a little bit for balance sake and ship the monies in. And he snaps us off with 2 kings, which is nice. Nice to hit that turn. I'm sure he's pretty mad about it. Realistically, with no reads, or at least presumably no reads, it's possible he knows something about me, I guess, but probably unlikely, being that he seems like a recreational player. With no reads, that looks pretty bad, if you ask me. So, calling the check raise on the turn may be reasonable if he has reason to believe that he's getting messed with quite a bit. But snap calling a turn check raise and snap calling a river jam are pretty bad. Top right hands, I am remembering it, and it's a little weird. Happy to have queens on the button. I'm getting a lot of big pairs on buttons, which is sweet. And I'm just going to be going ahead and c-betting this flop pretty much all the time. I wish I knew something about this player for the times I get check raised, and because I know I get check raised on the turn. Any case, turn obviously completes 8-9, but other than that, it's not that big of a deal. And it's going to be a pretty clear value bet. Well, of course, 8-9 got there. He's going to have 7-8, pocket eights, yada 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 yada. Plenty of hands. It's possible. He could also have something like 8-10, which now has turn top pair. And we aren't necessarily even going to get a fold from weaker hands, like some sort of 6x. So it's going to be a clear value bet. And unfortunately, we just have to make a decision if we get check raised. But such as poker. We get check raised pretty quick and relatively large. It's not huge. It's less than 3x, but it's a reasonable size. Honestly, I really, really don't like this spot. Situations like this, at least for me, are pretty difficult when I don't have any reads. And I, haven't been playing these games enough recently to know whether or not, like, all of a sudden check raising turns with, made hands, weak made hands that are being turned into bluffs, or, yeah, I mean, that's kind of really the only situation. Or, like, I guess something like 4-5 could also do it. I don't have any reason to believe that that's become, like, really commonplace. I think it's good in a lot of situations. I think it's really good, especially being that people double barrel a lot, and it seems to be only getting more and more of a double barreling game. So, any case, as is, I suppose I really should just call once and fold rivers. I think that's pretty gross, and it's obviously very exploitable. But without any extra information, ugh, I mean, it's just there aren't that many hands that he can have here that are air. It's like 4-5, 5-8 probably doesn't play it in the big blind, although I did open small, it's possible. And any other hands that he'd check call the flop with, I would assume would have at least a pair, and I don't have reason to believe people are turning them into bluffs. So I guess I changed my mind. I guess I should fold. I know I did fold at the time, but it just feels so gross, like absolutely disgusting to do. But I guess when I don't have any reads, I can't be making the assumption that people are turning made hands into a bluff. So if he really isn't turning made hands or misdraws into a bluff on the turn, because it's a good turn card to do it, or at least I don't know he is or think it's unlikely, then really we're in a spot where we're likely up against sets, two pair, with like 6-7, maybe 7-10 suited, and straights, and obviously our life sucks against that range. Truthfully, if it became a regular part of anybody's game, or my game, to just like bet flop, bet turn with overpair and always fold to a turn check raise when draws get there, you become extraordinarily exploitable, and it's awful because this is near the top of my range. Of course, I have sets, I have straights, etc., but combinatorically wise, this is one of the stronger hands in my range. There's no question about it. It's on the higher end of my range. So, yeah, I don't like it, or I'm not happy about it, but I fold, and I think without any other information, it is correct. Poker is more fun, at least for me, when you get to know your opponents a little bit. Bottom left, I open the button with 7-4 suited. Get called by the small blind. When they fly from the small blind, by the way, compared to the big blind, pretty big difference in range, especially when you're opening small like me. Opening small on the button encourages a lot more calls from the big blind. So people are going to end up flatting with pretty speculative hands, and correctly so. Not everybody makes the adjustment well, but enough people do. From the small blind, though, people still just aren't going to be flatting light. They always have to worry about getting squeezed. They're not closing the action. And, of course, their price isn't nearly as good. So I'd expect his range to be a bit stronger. I c-bet an ace-high flop at some point. Picked up a pair, but I just gave up after I got called. And I don't really think there's much of an argument to do otherwise with my particular hand. Especially when he is going to have a bit of a stronger range. Now, If it were the big blind and maybe I picked up the 7 on the turn, that can certainly change because now the big blind can be peeling with second pair, with a jack quite a bit or king queen, with a gutter and high card value. And picking up a pair will give me equity the times I'm called. Turns the times I'm called into a semi bluff. By ace x, whatever it may be, because I can pick up trips for 2 pair. And the times he folds, sometimes I had the best hand, but there's protection value in it. And sometimes I can, get him to fold a better hand, like Jack X. So, any case, I think in a spot like that, it's good. But here, when the small blind probably has a relatively tight range, I'm actually kind of surprised to see Ace 3 suited in his range. I think it was Ace 3, it might have been Ace 4, it doesn't matter. But small Ace X suited, he so far comes across as a bit tight. Uh, any case, I think it's pretty clear. When ace 10 offsuit from middle position, I could see an argument that in various games this is actually too loose. But it has to be pretty specific games, and something like this, I think it's completely standard and fine. So far, Accelerate looks really aggro. Hopefully, I take a look at his stats. I just quickly folded. He appears to be 3-betting quite a bit. I know he knows who I am. It might make him a little more likely to try and mess around with me. And he also, I'm sure, knows he's in a video. It might have been an okay spot to 4-bet, but realistically, if he has that mentality, he also might start 5-bet chipping on me light. So, if I had looked and seen that he was 3-betting a lot from the blinds, I still prefer 4-betting or calling. Doesn't play great as a call, but it plays okay. Against a wide range, it'll be fine because I can float with ace high quite often, potentially 2 overs, and yada yada yada. I don't necessarily have to be afraid of facing 3 barrels all the time, even when I flop an ace. So against somebody who has a wide range, I think that's a fine way to play it. I'm pausing because we have a few other situations here. Bottom right, I open ace 4 suited under the gun. Completely standard for me. Especially in a game where I assume I'm a favorite by a fair amount, and I'm not that worried about most of the other players. That said, we do have the $10 stack who is aggro and loose, 2 to my left. It makes opening ace 4 suited bad, in my opinion. We are going to get shoved on pretty often. I actually don't really have a major problem calling it off versus just him. I'm not thrilled about it, but it's probably okay because this is the type of guy who's probably just going to shove king 10 suited. Of course he's going to shove the hands that crush me as well, but I think he'll shove enough weaker stuff that it's okay. All that said, I have a player to act behind me. I think this makes this a really, really clear fold and a bad open in the first place. So, any case, because that player behind me, if he's any good, he actually should be flatting strong hands pretty often here. Planning on having the guy on his left shove reasonably light, and then possibly getting me to put in too much money, ISO shoving, reshipping light, etc. So, and this is even more so the case with at least one weak player behind. While he is an aggro, encouraging action from the bad players when you have strong hands is a very good thing. So, any case, I folded, and I shouldn't have opened it to begin with. Queen Jack offsuit in the top left. This is a hand that I do flat 3-bets with against pretty aggro players who are 3-betting a fair amount. In position, I think it's pretty clear against those guys all the time. Against those types of players, we can usually pretty comfortably get it in when we flop, a decent draw or top pair, something like that, and we can continue pretty often. Of course, we're going to be dominated sometimes, etc., but against an aggro 3-bet, it's fine. As is, we're up against somebody who now we have 60 hands on, and we have seen him 3-bet 4% of the time. Pretty small. I may or may not hover over stats, take a look on the blinds. But as is, we're seeing a player that's so far, and we're starting to develop a bit of a sample, appears to be not only tight, but not 3-betting much. So I think against this particular player, this is actually a fold, and we're just going to be dominated a little bit too often. And I don't necessarily have reason to believe we're just going to run circles around the guy and outplay him a bunch post flop. He's probably a pretty solid, pretty reasonable player who's going to have a strong range that Queen Jack doesn't do well against. So I think it's a fold. and it's a fold I made. I wasn't sure if I did. Kind of didn't think I would. Uh, Jimmy Berto, or at least wouldn't sometimes, because sometimes I'm stupid. Uh, Head flat him use sevens. Obviously, the way he played that is 100% standard and the only way to play it. But it's possible he could have stronger hands in there too. And I actually would just assume because of the player on his left, if he's being aware. And to be fair, I wasn't being aware of the stack size on my left, so maybe it's giving too much credit. But if he's aware, I would expect his range to be stronger than normal because of that shove. Not just because he's adding in some strong hands to induce, but also because flatting with weaker speculative hands is going to be no good because there's going to be a shove there, reasonably often. So we got another hand against OOMX. He's opening the cutoff, and I have ace jack offsuit. It's a small open. This is a hand that I am going to be three betting a reasonable amount against various players. It's another hand that I feel like plays really well as a flat as well. So I'm going to base it purely on how aggro the player seems to be, how loose he's playing from the blinds, and how often he appears to be calling three bets. Now, as is, this guy doesn't necessarily seem crazy, and already at a glance it looks like he's folding to, I'm sure it's a small sample, probably a couple hands or something, a few, probably five. He is folding to three bets though at 60%. So against him, I think this is a pretty clear flat with the little information we have, and go ahead and play some post-flop poker. Flops 5-5 deuce. You can see right away. Granted, it's over a small sample, but and I paused that in the wrong spot. But what I started to look at is actually his street aggression. Basically, until I have reads on my players and actually know something about them, I just have to go off the little bit I have. And if he were the type of player that we believed was double barreling a ton and just really aggro on turns, flops and turns, he's the kind of player that I'm actually going to be a lot more likely to either check raise here or fold. Of course, sometimes I'll still check call just because, with two big overs, specifically, with an ace and a jack, but more the ace than anything, an over that he's probably barreling a lot with his air. It's a spot where I just really, really like check calling. We have the best hand a pretty good chunk of the time, and we have some implied odds. But against players who are just going to barrel some obscene amount, I will consider just check raising this or sometimes check folding, although I guess that's probably not happening that often. But I'm taking a look at it, and I think from what we see, we don't have reason to believe that's the case, and it just makes it a relatively clear check call. Worth noting, his bet size at 4 into a 5, so 4/5 pot, on a 5-5 deuce rainbow board is pretty big. I, don't really know what that's about. My guess is more than anything, he just kind of has a standard amount. He's probably playing a lot of tables, maybe using Table Ninja, which, by the way, you can see I'm starting to try out. That's why all my tables are highlighting red, and I'm betting weird amounts because I'm betting percentages of the pot from Table Ninja. Any case, he might just have his standard amount and just bets the same all the time. If it were a weaker player, let's not even go into it. It's just a bunch of silly speculation. So, any case, we'll see what happens on the turn. Turn's a good card for us, obviously. It's the kind of card that if he bet again, I would actually have to consider folding, just because he can value town us pretty well with any sort of smallish overpair. And with Ace X, he can actually bet a couple times trying to get us off a chop. So, or at least bet one more time. So I really think that that's a spot where against this particular player, I probably have to look at folding against somebody who I have reason to believe is hyper aggro. It's different. As is, he checks back. We have the best hand, I think, majority of the time. It is certainly possible he checked back something like pocket sixes, just because, of course, we could have 5x or deuce x. There are deuces in my range with like ace deuce suited, but there aren't a lot of them. Any case, I think it's more likely that he has air or ace x, king x, something like that. So, any case, on this river, I don't think we're getting value from anything because we just don't represent any bluffs. Even by the off chance, I flatted the big blind with 3-4 suited and check called, both of which seem very unlikely. I now would have hit a straight. So I just don't represent any air in this situation. So I think I may as well bet big. I don't think betting small is going to get a crying call with a king or something. So if I bet big, though, I actually should be able to get him off of a chop a decent amount of the time. The times he does have ace X, and I bet big here, I would be playing 5X if I check called with it the exact same way, and then of course any sort of overpair 6X, which now or sixes, which now is a boat, sevens, eights, nines. I might not even be three betting pocket tens in this spot. So any of those hands, threes and fours also even, are better. So any case, I would by betting big here, it puts him in a spot where he's calling for half the pot sometimes when he has ace X, and to lose a fair amount sometimes. So I think betting close to pot here is certainly the optimal play. A lot of the times when he folds, which is what happens, we had him beat anyway, and it doesn't matter. But we weren't getting a call from those hands, and sometimes we get him off a chop, and we pick up $6 or something like that. And an extra six big blinds is nothing to scoff at. Win rates aren't that big these days. It's about 11. I think anywhere from honestly like 10 to 16 is fine, or 10 to 18 is a little bit of merit over betting. I think though that going right at about pot is probably optimal in this type of spot. Bottom right, I just flatted with 7-8 suited. I think it's a pretty clear flat. I'm going to make a quick double check. I'm pretty sure this was a limp call situation. It was. Okay. So basically, while I am, of course, or have at least once with ace X and got a fold, and we'll be doing it sometimes with air, very strong hands. Three betting servo. I think with hands like this, like 8-7, well, it's 8-7 suited. Well, it's already a standard for me to just call, and most of the time I am just going to call and not be three betting a lot with it. I think in this spot it's super clear, and just I think doing anything other than calling here is really, really bad. This is a spot where we've got, we're likely going to have multi-way action, and by three betting we drive out what appears to be the weakest player at the table. So it's a small point, or one that I think most people will know anyway, but it's worth bringing up because I really think it's quite bad to do anything other than that, and I know people do, or some people get a little carried away with three betting hands like this. As is, we don't flop all that great. We flop second pair, and it checks to us. There's a little bit of merit in betting here, but for the most part, I think checking back is best. We've got our Simon buddy up there who we know is quite passive, and we won't. I think it's quite reasonable. I think he'll check call with any diamond, likely check call with any seven, maybe even any three, and then of course any ace, and then possibly like any pocket pairs he limped with. So that's a pretty wide range that we're not getting tons of value from as far as things go as a range. Servo I actually think is giving up most of the time. I think considering Simon is in this pot, and I don't have that many flushes and ace X's. I think he's just gonna c bet the vast majority of the time he has something for value and try and get as much value as he can from Simon. So I think for the most part he's kind of out of the picture, and I actually consider hero calling him this like checked down and then he bet the river. But Simon anyway I think is just going to be continuing too often, and I mean we are still going to win at showdown sometimes if this whole thing checks down. Turn there's like a little bit more merit in betting, just as kind of it would be a protection bet more than anything, which obviously we're not doing all that often in no limit hold'em, but it may be slightly worth it just to get somebody to fold a random diamond or even just like king queen, king jack, whatever it may be, that does have equity against us. But for the most part, I'm just a little bit more comfortable checking this down. And we'll probably also, these passive players are gonna be passive as much as they can, but by the river if he does have any sort of strong hand and he still hasn't seen a bet, we're gonna hear from him, and I don't think it's gonna be a bluff very often. So it's kind of nice that when we do check back the turn as well, now we get to actually fold the times we're beat, which is pretty sweet. And then the times we, of course, have the best hand, that protection that I was talking about just really is not of huge value anyway. Bottom left is a little weird. I opened Jack eight of clubs, small blind versus big blind, and decided to check it or check call the flop. Um, I don't have any reason to believe this guy's all that nuts. Because of that, I think this plays okay as a check call. If I thought he was really aggro and really tough, I actually think this is just better just to bet, simply for playability's sake. When we check uh, and check call, I mean, we really kind of cap our range to being, pocket queens or worse. So it's not a spot I want to get into against, a player who is paying a lot of attention and a good hand reader and is just gonna put a lot of pressure on me because it just ends up putting me in a guessing game spot. As is, though, I don't have any reason to believe that's the case, and I think he will bet some air on the flop and then possibly just give up. I don't know for sure that's the case with this guy, and he does apparently know who I am, so it's possible he'll go a little out of his way to mess with me. But I think with the information I have, this should be a good default play, and reasonably often it's going to check through, and then I most of the time have the best hand and can just bet. Also, it is really nice to see turns in this spot, simply because not only do we have a pair which can do good things, but we do have a backdoor flush draw. So on 9 turn cards, we are feeling pretty good about our hand. Or I guess it would be 9 or 10. Sorry, 10 turn cards. Sorry, I always expect flush draws to be 9 outers, so that's where my head went. But this is a backdoor flush draw, so it's a 10 outer. And as is, once he bets twice quickly, I mean, I certainly think he can have some draws, flush draws. 6-7, I think, could be in his range for sure, because he just bet when check two with air. I think, it's possible he's doing that. And then, turns some equity and just decides to hammer, and I think that's fine. At the same time, he's going to be value touting us with any king, and even a lot of the flush draws have just great equity against us anyway, with 2 overs and spades. Bottom right, Simon did wake up and make a bet. Of course, it's possible he is just making some kind of bluff here because nobody seems interested in the pot. I know it shouldn't matter, but truthfully, it does usually with weaker players. I think it's possible that I think it's more likely he actually would do this if he had something like the King of Diamonds. People get, weaker players get attached to their hands. When you have like the King of Diamonds on a board like this, you feel happy about the draw. So when he actually finally misses, he'd be more likely to still have a desire to win the hand than if he, just had completely whiffed with like 9-10 offsuit or something. Weird side point. It doesn't really affect my decision here. I'm just pretty tangential, I guess. Any case, it's a clear fold for me. I just don't have enough. Yeah, I think that if you were to sum the average of all players of his type with the info we have about him, he's going to be more likely to be doing this for value than as one of those weird one-off bluffs. I'll finish this top left hand and then call it a video, I suppose. I think we're pushing it here on time. I 3-bet King 7 of spades against Johnny B39, who's pretty loose and is folding to 3-bet so far. I think it's completely fine 3-betting him in position. We get cold called by a short stack in the small blind, and he is somebody who we have seen is just not very good so far. Or at least we've seen him do things that aren't very good, or like indicative of a not good player. 1, having a short stack, and 2, open limping, things like that. On this flop, it is weird. When he cold calls a 3-bet, it's a little scary. So far, he looks pretty tight. It is possible he only has overpairs. I would argue that most players like this are also going to have at least ace-king, because they won't necessarily just shove it. Some might just shove it, but not all. Ace-king, ace-queen. Some of them, of course, are going to have pocket pairs and just suited connectors and crap like that. I don't know if he's one of them. But as is, I flopped an overcard in the second nut flush draw. So while I would play cautiously against him, this is just a clear bet get in. As is, he donks into us for a pretty sizable amount. Honestly, I think he has an overpair here quite a bit. Pocket tens, pocket jacks, pocket queens. Typically what you think of when people cold call 3-bets is hands like jacks or queens or tens. That doesn't necessarily apply here. This guy doesn't seem standard, and even against those hands, we have 40 some percent equity, and there's an overlay. I'm just not folding, so I may as well ship it in and hope this is going to be some really silly situation where he donked with like 6-7, of hearts that he called with because he didn't know what to do, or pocket eights because he didn't know what to do, and finds a way to fold when I shove. So there is just no other play. I remember taking a second and thinking about it because it was all around just kind of weird. Like, he cold called, whatever, but it doesn't matter. We just have such good equity against even a strong cold calling range. And it's a short stack, so shovel the monies in. I'm taking longer than I wish I did because I want me to just do this and move on. But it took me a little bit to think it through. There goes the pile, and it's pretty awesome that he is banking. The fact that he could even consider folding anything he did this with makes me really happy about our shove. And getting him to fold would obviously be awesome. He calls. He has pocket jacks, and we fail to suck out. But we're doing pretty well against that particular hand, and all's well and good. This is going to be the end of part one of this. I assume I will do some parts, future parts, assuming you guys want to see them. So leave me feedback and all that good stuff, guys. If we do go ahead and do a part two or part three, there are definitely going to be a few hands that I'm going to at least try and talk to Dr. Jiggy about, maybe Phil, because I do remember a couple of them that are just a little bit weird. And since I'm admittedly maybe slightly rusty or a bit rusty in these games, I may as well go ahead and get some other opinions. Truthfully, that's how I play poker. I hit up my friends and the people I work with when I do have situations that I'm not sure of to get their opinions and improve as a player. So I may as well take that approach in videos when I have similar spots. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Leave me feedback as always. It's Jason Senti for BlueFirePoker.com.